Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Homeschool Minnesota. My name is Dayle, and I'm so glad that you're with us today. It wasn't so long ago in our history that kids were able to fully experience a multi generational family with parents, grandparents, and even great grandparents. Our society has somewhat gotten away from that for various reasons. But the value of having grandparents or grandparent aged people in your family's life is still very high. Today, we're talking to Isabel Tom from The Value of Wrinkles, all about multi generational families. Hi, Isabel. Welcome.
Hi, Dale. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad that you have time to be with us today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Tell us a little bit about yourself and just your upbringing and why this topic is so important to you.
Sure. So I think when people hear my story, they assume that I grew up living with my grandparents and that I always really loved it. And it was just like I embodied it from the beginning. But this is kind of a story of how God has worked in my life. It is a special story in that I grew up in a household with my two older sisters, my parents, and then my mama and yaya, which in Cantonese is paternal grandparents. And so I think, over the years, especially I would say as I high school, college, and beyond, because my grandparents lived so long, they lived to 98 and 102, and I lived
Wow.
in the same household as them. I really got to have this perspective. Like as I matured, I started looking at them differently. I also worked in the senior care field. So I worked with a lot of other older adults. And so that gave me perspective too, to understand like the different patterns and different things that I started to see happening in other people's lives. And then noticing like, oh, my grandparents, I think they must be thinking about that too. So there's a lot there, and God is still showing me so many things. But I'm really honored and blessed to be able to use this part of my story, which was not something that I achieved or tried to accomplish. I was just born into a multi generational household, had that relationship, and God's allowed me to use it.
I love that. So you grew up in a multi-generational household, as do I want to say around the world. This is kind of normal. That grandparents are moved into the home or moved into the, and we're not advocating for that, and that's not really our culture. And I know some people do it, and it's wonderful if you can. But what we're asking for is just involvement. So can you tell us about the importance to a family of involving a multi-generational, uh, I guess, dynamic to their family and what that looks like and why that's important, not just to your children and to you as a parent, but also to your parents as grandparents. What does that do for the whole family?
Well, there's so much. So I think first, as a mom, I would say I'm learning. I have three kids right now. Let's see, how old are they? 9, 11, and 14. And I'm learning over time. And I think I've actually was a caregiver or grandchild longer than I've been a parent now, right? But I've learned that one way that I honor my parents is by allowing them and teaching my kids to have a relationship and an appreciation for their grandparents. And I know this is hard because some people, they'll say they don't have, the grandparents aren't like that. They're
Yeah.
not that type of grandparent. And I totally understand that. But one of the things that we get when we have older people in our lives is we gain a long-term perspective. So we start to see things, a younger person may value today and what they want today and what game they want to play and how much of this, and they're comparing with their peers. But once a younger person is just exposed. They don't even have to have a close relationship, but that exposure to an older person allows them to look at things from a completely different lens. Like, oh, as I get older, this is something that may happen to me. This is something I may experience. So I think it kind of prepares you for life because we are all going to get older.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think just having the dynamic of all different ages, as a parent, I don't have the capacity to provide my kids with the attention that they want, with the availability that they want. And I tell people, like, I have to tell my kids every single day, wait, hold on a second. Somebody else is talking, or I'm doing something. Once I finish this, I got you. But their grandparents, man, they have this availability and they're able to give them this like undivided attention that I
Mhm.
think God has gifted them with and that our kids need. And this is not just if you have grandparents around, but just older adults in general, I would say.
Yeah. I think it's really important to emphasize, and you can talk a little bit about this too, Isabel, is that sometimes your parents aren't in your life for a reason.
Mhm. Mhm.
Sometimes maybe they've just gone before you,
Mhm.
and or maybe there's just some kind of a toxic dynamic there that you're just like, I just can't have them in my children's life on a regular basis. Like sparingly, I can have them
Mhm.
in there,
Mhm.
but not on a regular basis. Is it the same dynamic if you bring in somebody from, let's say from church or from your neighborhood, an older person that you kind of just adopt a grandparent in a way, or adopt kind of that I mean, you work with older people, you see people
Mhm.
who, maybe live in facilities and things like that that don't even get visitors, and, you can have you and your family can kinda just be like, "We're gonna adopt that family, and we're that person, and we're gonna kinda just hear their stories and spend time with them," is that just as important or just as valuable?
I do think it's just as valuable. And I think you're right. Sometimes your relationship with your own parents or in laws or whatever may not be healthy where you can like spend quality time with them. Maybe
Yeah.
spending quality time might be a very ugly situation, right? The first thing I would say is remember that I think about the five love languages, right? There
Mhm.
is not one way that you can love someone. And so,
Yeah.
yes, maybe it needs to be at a distance. Maybe it just needs to be we're going to send grandma a card and maybe it's one way, right?
Mhm.
We're not going to go on vacation with them. We're not going to do the same things that I think a lot of people have this expectation of what a
Mhm.
grandparent relationship is like. And so they just get disappointed because the grandparents don't babysit or they don't, go on vacation and they're not all happy together. That's totally fine. I think
Mhm.
you can teach your kids that yes, there are going to be people in your life that maybe you can't be close with.
Mhm.
But you can still honor them. You can still remember them. You can still love them in a different way. Um, and then I think even if somebody is not your relative, like biologically a grandparent. So I run this program called the Grandkid Investigator program.
Yeah, I wanted to
And
ask you about that.
yeah, and so I use the Grandkid Investigator missions from my Grandkid Investigator kit. This sounds really, I'm bringing you into a different world, but I use those missions as a way to help kids connect with an older person who is not their biological grandparent. And it's really neat because I think older adults in general, one, they are living a slower life. And
Mhm.
so they are able to bless the younger generation, even bless moms with this presence, right? Like they're not going to check their phone while they're talking to you. They're not like, oh, hold on a second. I got to go do something. They're
Mhm.
just sitting there. And sometimes, we do this every week, this program, and sometimes they're just sitting there watching a kid play. And
Yeah.
so it's really not that they're even sharing lessons of wisdom from their life. It's their presence. So I
Mhm.
like to say that older adults, they add an extra layer of love, attention, availability that I think helps kids to thrive. And honestly, like if we're going to talk about Jesus, this is how I understand Jesus. Like I think he looks at us and he delights in our presence, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it's not like we have to come all dressed up, looking pretty, anything.
Performing him in some way.
Exactly. That was how
Mhm.
my relationship with my grandma was very much like. I just really she was my safe space. Just
Oh,
come, right?
yeah.
And I didn't need to have an agenda. I didn't have to say I'm going to do this with you. It was just be there. And she
Mhm.
just like loved being with me, which is what I feel older adults love being around younger people. It
Yeah.
just brings them life, right?
Yeah.
So it gives me a picture of um, what our relationship with God is like.
Yeah, I love that. Um, you know, Can you talk a little bit to parents about the importance of, like, fostering that relationship? I know as a grandparent, okay, I'm
Yeah,
speaking as a grandparent here.
sure. Go
I
for
don't
it.
my adult kids, I raise them, I trust them, I know that they're good parents. The one thing I don't wanna be is that mother-in-law or that mom who just steps in all the time, and,
Hmm.
sometimes I feel like I wanna be invited in, and know kind of like, I don't wanna overstep, you're doing a great job, you're doing it differently than I did it, but you're doing it very, very well,
Hmm.
so what is my role in this? How can children, foster a healthy relationship between their children and the children's grandparents or their parents or their
Yeah.
in-laws. What are 3 or 4 things that parents can do to make that happen?
Okay, so without giving you a dissertation, stop me if I need to, okay?
Just keep talking.
So I really feel like parents are the connectors, the
Mm,
playmakers. You cannot stick a child with their grandparent, like maybe once in a while, naturally it will happen, but I really do think that parents have a really vital role to play. And when they do certain things, it's a benefit to them. It's a benefit to the grandparents and the grandkids. So first, I like to make sure as a mom, I remind my kids, I help them realize that they really do have a superpower when it comes to their grandparents. I say that grandkids bless without baggage.
it's so
And
true.
I think that grandkids, I don't need scientific evidence. You just look at a grandparent's face when they see their grandchild,
Yeah.
or how they want to show everybody the pictures of their grandchild, or how they brag about how my grandson just called me the other day and invited me to this,
Mhm.
it is a really special relationship. And so I think it's really important when my kids talk to their grandma or we visit and maybe they don't want to be there that day. I remind them, you really have this super special ability to bless your grandparent in a way that I cannot, in a way that I cannot. And I think that's important because kids want to know they can make a difference. And so sometimes they think they have to travel to a third world country or be making sandwiches and passing it out to the homeless. No, you can do this in your own family.
Yes.
And so I think sometimes we think that grandparents are self-sufficient. Like I was a grandchild for many, many years, and there were many years where I thought, oh, well, they're fine. They're adults. They're grandparents. They don't need anything. But in working with other older adults in in the field of senior care, I came to see, oh man, as somebody gets older, there's a lot of things they're struggling with.
Yeah.
And so, especially, I would encourage high school, middle school, high school, college, young adult grandchildren. I mean, there's so much that parents can do to just remind them, you know, hey, when you call grandma, or even if you just say, how are you doing? And look her in the eye when she sees, when you see her, that it's really not fair to the parent that they can do that and be so loved just
Yeah.
because they said hello
It's
and
so
asked them
true.
how they are, but that's the truth, right?
Yeah.
Um, so one, help them realize they have this superpower. Two, I would say it's so important as a parent to help your kids understand different things related to the grandparents. So sometimes you might not even be with the grandparent, but you could be talking about something about them. So maybe a grandchild is disappointed, like, how come grandma can't do this? Or how come we always have to go over there and help her or whatever?
Mhm.
As a parent, I have this understanding where I can explain and say, hey, you know what? Grandma, she just had a health issue or she just fell. And when older people fall, sometimes it's not as easy for them to recover as
Yeah.
quickly. And so she's not able to move around as easily as she used to. And so this is when we can serve her and help her.
Mhm.
Or even if it's, I know I have worked in end of life care. So even just explaining to kids different things of what's going on. Like he needs an oxygen tube right now, and that's helping
Mhm.
him to breathe. Isn't that
Mhm.
amazing? And I homeschooled for 1 year, but I take that homeschooling like philosophy of just teaching your kids everywhere you go.
Mhm.
And so I think a lot of your listeners can probably relate to this. But we can teach our kids like this is science,
Yeah.
or teaching them how a wheelchair works. This is like
Mhm.
somebody invented this. Did you know that? Like
Yeah.
this helps somebody get around. Um, we want our kids to understand certain situations because sometimes if we don't explain to them things, they have great imaginations and they will come up with something themselves. And sometimes it is completely off target, right?
Yeah, it's
And
so
those are
true.
that's how stereotypes can get created. So and I would say especially if a parent has dementia,
Mm.
that can be, you can very much quickly, a child can start saying, grandma's mean, she shouted at me. But then you start explaining how the brain works.
Mm.
And this is a lesson about like an educational lesson, but this is also a lesson like this is really hard. And it's probably harder for her,
Yeah.
and so when you do this, or when you come up to her from the front and speak to her in a calm voice, that helps her to feel safe. So I think kids can
Yeah.
really relate to that type of thing. And I won't keep going too far because, like I said, this could be a dissertation. But I would say ultimately, there are going to be times where your child's like not going to take it. They're grumpy, or maybe they're going through, maybe it's puberty or whatever, right? Model it. Okay,
Yeah.
if my kids are not doing something, then I'm going to do it.
Mm.
And yeah, you don't feel like, yes, I know you don't feel like having a cheerful heart when we go have dinner, but I'm going to do this. And because
Mm.
I realize that our relationship with grandma is important. And so
Yeah.
I think ultimately that's how our kids learn, right? They
Yeah.
watch us.
Yeah.
So there's so many different ways I think that parents can play a role, but those are just a couple of them.
I love that. I think too, understanding that as grandparents, it's so true. Just looking at our grandkids, we have technology today. I was telling Isabel before the podcast that our kids will call with their kids on like a video chat, and it just makes our day. And it's something that's just simple. Like today, I had peas, and we're like, "Good for you, buddy! You ate peas. That's awesome!"
Yeah.
And we're just cheering, and then sometimes we'll come up with a little song about it. And isn't that just so cool? Oliver ate his peas, and he gets all excited because he's very, Oliver would never eat peas, first of all.
Yeah.
But I just think about how, just our grandkids, that the little things in their life, they just want to share it, and they want to share it with everybody. And they're so proud of their accomplishments, and parents get to see it all the time. And so they aren't as celebrated, not because the parents don't think it's important, but grandparents don't get to involve themselves. So every little thing is celebrated with a
Yeah,
grandparent because it's
absolutely.
all new to them. Like, oh, look at your walking, and they're like, well, they've been walking for
Absolutely.
3 weeks, mom. And it's like, well, I didn't get to see it. So yay, or,
The
um, you know,
enthusiasm, that's what you
right,
bring. You bring the enthusiasm because I
right.
mean, my kids will tell me fun facts, and I'm like, okay, right now I'm actually thinking about something else,
I
to be
literally
honest.
can't hear another
So
fun
I'm like,
fact.
that's wonderful. Thank you.
You know
But
who
I
would love
cannot.
to hear those fun facts?
Yeah,
Grandma, call her.
exactly. And so I prompt them. I
Yeah,
prompt them when we're with the grandparents. Hey, you should tell grandma about this. You
yeah,
should tell her that joke that you told me the other day because inside I'm like, oh, I'm tired.
yeah,
And inside for her, for
yep,
their grandmothers, they're the two last living grandparents that they in my family that
yeah.
my kids have. Their grandmothers are like, really? Like, I want to know. Yeah, please tell
Yeah,
me something that's going on right now. And my kids are getting older. And so I really do need to prompt them sometimes.
yeah,
But I have seen that as I do that, as I prompt it at them, as I talk to them about their grandparents, as I model it, that relationship happens much more naturally. So I actually
yeah,
don't have to
yeah,
always, prompt them to have a conversation. It's not awkward anymore
yeah.
because I might have to say one thing to remind them,
Mm.
but then they talk and they're comfortable.
Yeah.
So,
Do you think that it's interesting to me, like, prompting them to be able to have a good relationship with an older person also kind of takes them outside themselves. As a child, the world is kind of very small because it's all about
yeah,
you, right? And our job as parents is to expand that and make them realize that there's a whole wide world out there that has nothing to do with you, but it
yeah,
affects you. And so just kind of giving them that ability to see past themselves to
absolutely.
somebody else's needs, and that you can be a part of meeting that need for grandma. Grandma really needs just somebody to come and just read to her, or grandma needs somebody to just come and watch a TV with her, or grandma would love to hear that joke. 14. I mean, because if you laugh, they're going to keep telling it, and
Yeah,
you could sit all day and laugh at the same joke. And a grandparent
yeah.
will delight in that, where a parent would be like, "Listen, I got to make dinner," because grandparents don't have you're right, they have the a gift of slowing down and not having to do all the things that are on parents' plates, which is, I think, just such an inherent God thing about grandparents.
Well, I just think about just undivided attention.
Yeah.
And I live in the DC area. I don't know what Minnesota is like, but I don't, even if you're just a parent, right? Life is busy
Yeah.
and people are in a frenzy often. And so
Mhm.
to have anybody just slow down and wonder how you're doing and really, really care about you and look
Yeah.
you in the eye and or just slow down for you and want to listen to your entire story, like that is a gift. And I think our kids yearn for that, right? Maybe they can
Mhm.
get a phone and they can do this, but I think to help them to understand what relationship, like the gift of relationship, is so beautiful.
Yeah.
um there was something else I was going to mention. Oh, the other thing is, we are helping, as a mom, I'm helping my kids to see that their grandparents may have a need at times. But also, part of the reason why I created my whole Grandkid Investigator thing is because I wanted kids to, one, learn how to ask questions and to realize that when they ask questions, wow, like this whole world can be opened up, right? Like,
Yeah.
you didn't know that grandma, like my son is playing soccer and he just found out from his grandmother, he's 9. I didn't have this conversation with her. He found out that the soccer team that he plays for, which is like in our county, the logo, his grandpa, who his passed when my husband was very young, he helped design that logo.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, like, when you just ask questions, like teaching our kids that when you ask people questions, this is a social skill, right? That
Yes.
helps you to build relationships. We're helping them to learn how to do that with their grandparents, which that's like, I would say, the safest space to start
Yeah.
developing social skills. But we're really teaching them how to relate to people who are different than themselves.
Yeah.
And so when they start to ask a question to, let's say, a child with special needs or a child who is, from a different background, and they start asking them and they're like, wait, you lived in a place where, you live down the street from a place that you can buy bubble tea every day. That's amazing,
That would be amazing. I would love that.
Right? But I mean, my mother-in-law, we found out that she went to the high school that there's a movie called Remember the Titans. I don't know if you've heard of that movie.
Yes.
She went to that high school. So like these aren't conversations you usually have when you're just sitting around the table and saying, "What did you do this week?" But I wanted kids to
Wow.
be able to talk about different types of things
Yeah.
and to be able to pull out the fun stories that I think, like, me as a parent, I actually want to know those stories, right? Like
Yeah.
that my mom didn't have a bathroom. She had an outhouse when she was younger,
Wow.
right? Or she didn't have a toothbrush for years.
Yeah.
She grew up in a village, didn't have a toothbrush. And my kids are like, what?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's exciting. That
Yeah.
is like lively conversation. So,
Right.
kind of bringing life to the grandparents and
Yeah.
helping the grandkids to see that they are not just who they are right now.
Mm.
Like there's this whole timeline
Whole world.
beforehand,
Yeah.
right? And it's just
Yeah.
so fun when you
And it's
see them
tied to
realize that.
it's tied to their heritage and their history of their family,
Absolutely.
and grandparents can infuse that into them, which gives them confidence and identity, all the things that kids are now lacking.
Yes.
That whole identity of who they are. Grandparents are vital in instilling that in children.
Mm-hmm.
This is what your relatives did, and this is something that you probably didn't know about. Your great-great-grandpa was, in Pearl Harbor on December
Exactly.
7th, 1941,
Yeah.
and it
So
was a big
it's
deal, you
so
know?
one thing is I have ADHD, and so
Mm,
when I was in school, it was very hard for me to read a textbook.
yeah,
But this is like one of the best ways to learn, right? When you get
yeah,
to talk to somebody, it's like the history book coming alive. And that's the
yes,
reality, that there are so many older adults who have these experiences and backgrounds that are part of history,
yeah,
and they're not going to be here forever, and that's part of
yeah,
the urgency that I think makes this even more important. Yes, it's important to teach our kids many things, but
yeah,
the people that they have here, whether it's their grandparents or maybe it's an older lady at church
mhm,
who had that story, who
mhm.
were a part of history, like that is something you can't get anywhere else.
Exactly. So, the importance of, I'm picturing right now
Yeah.
us talking and a mom listening or a dad listening and going, "Yeah, that is not our dynamic. My parents have passed or it's just not going to happen."
Mm.
I want to encourage you guys, there are so many ways to get that involvement in your kids' lives. It's going to take a little bit more work on your end,
Yeah.
but the value that you give your children, having that relationship with somebody who's from a different generation of them it's just there's just no way to put a price tag on that. It really is just so important for their
Mhm.
development. And you love a lot of people like family who are not family. And your kids can have that gift too of loving people like family who are not family.
Mm-hmm.
You talked real briefly about neurodivergent, and I want to talk about that for
Yeah.
a second because,
Sure.
that's a thing. You have autism, you have all these different things. If you have a neurodivergent or an ADHD child, how can parents help grandparents understand how to build healthy relationship with those kids? It doesn't always come very naturally, especially, if you've got a child who has a hard time with attachment, has a hard
Yeah.
time, maybe they're just all over the place. How do we foster those relationships?
So I will send you the link afterwards, but I do have a podcast where I talked about neurodivergence and grandparents
Okay.
because I think it is a whole nother topic, right? But I will say one, just a quick thought is I have a son with autism. I have a daughter with ADHD, and I have ADHD. But I feel like, again, the parent's role is so important. And so I try to make sure, maybe my son doesn't talk as much to
Yeah.
his grandmas because social
Yeah.
situations are very difficult.
Sure.
I do a lot of prompting. I do a lot of bragging and sharing via text when when it's just me one-on-one with the grandparent, because I want them to see my children in a good light, and I get to see when they're completely open and not afraid and not,
Yeah.
when they're dysregulated. And
Yeah.
so I think as a parent, it's important for us to brag about our kids to the
Yes.
grandparents. And then, yes, sometimes you're not going to get that understanding because autism, neurodivergence, it's all very new to them.
Mhm.
But I think so. This is a plug for my Grandkid Investigator kit, but that's why I created this tool, because I realize that kids don't always naturally know what to ask. And so they need to be prompted. And so I have these questions, and it's essentially a mission where they are asking them questions, and they feel safer when they already know what to ask. And so I have tasked my kids, like, you have to, before you do any electronics, I want you to finish one mission, and then you
Yeah.
can do your electronics. And even if they don't want to do it, I have seen that they're still listening, right? They
Right.
still hear something. And the more they do it, the more conversations come out and the more comfortable they feel. Then you get the repetition, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely, it's amazing because in my program, a lot of the kids who have developed really sweet relationships, a lot of them are autistic. And I give them that framework. Okay, you've got a mission today. And then I say afterwards, then we can play board games, you can play piano, you can do whatever. And I've seen wonderful, beautiful relationships develop because of that, like just because you provided some guidance and structure.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Isabel, for being with us today. And
So
I'm
fun.
going to have, obviously, in the show notes, the links to the Grandkid Investigator program, the kit, everything, the website for Value of Wrinkles. And just so that you guys can just start really being, we're talking a lot about discipleship. Discipleship happens intentionally.
Yeah.
So there are times when it just happens, but usually you have to be intentional about it. And so bringing that dynamic to your family of a multi-generational family, that's an intentional thing. Grandparents don't always feel comfortable inserting themselves. Some do. Then you got to be like, okay, boundaries. But a lot don't. They just really want to be asked, or they're just wanting to make sure. Yeah. And so I just want to encourage everybody. All the advice that Isabel has given us today has been just valuable, of just start today. If you don't have a grandparent nearby, there are a lot of people who would fill in for that grandparent. So find one and kind of adopt them and make them part of your family. We do that with other things. We can do it with a grandparent. Yeah. Any last words of advice or anything that you want to say before we sign off?
Just remind your kids they have a superpower, and it takes very little, like it literally could be a wave for them to make an impact on the life of their grandparent or an older adult.
So good. They do have a superpower. All they have to do is show those little faces around somebody old, and they're like, ah! Yeah, it's crazy. Well, thank you guys so much for coming today and for listening. We appreciate you. We are so grateful for you. Just a reminder that Homeschool Minnesota podcast is an outreach of Homeschool Minnesota, MACHE, Minnesota Association of Christian Home Educators. We're just so grateful that you guys listen to us and show up, and we'll see you next time. Bye.